June 1960. A lake called Bodom on the wooded edge of Espoo, Finland. 4 teenagers pitch a single tent on the shore. 2 boys, 2 girls. The oldest is 18. The youngest is 15. By dawn, 3 of them are dead. The 4th is alive inside the collapsed tent, injured, in shock, and unable, then or ever, to say who came out of the trees. 66 years later, Finland has never agreed on a single name. In June of 1960, Finland was at the start of its short, intense northern summer. The days were long, the nights barely darkened at all. It was the kind of weather that pulls young people outdoors and keeps them there. 4 teenagers from the Helsinki area decided to go camping together beside Lake Bodom, about 22 kilometres outside the city. There were 4 of them, and their names matter because every cold case begins with names. Mila Emerli Björklund was 15 years old. Anja Tuulikki-Mäki was also 15. Seppo Antero Boisman was 18. And Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson was also 18. He was, by most accounts, the boyfriend of Mila Björklund. They were ordinary teenagers, 2 couples broadly speaking, on an ordinary summer outing. They rode out to the lake on motorcycles and bicycles on the evening of June 4th, a Saturday, and they pitched a single tent on the southern shore of the lake. It was a popular area. Bodom was a place people went. There were houses not far away. There were other campers elsewhere along the water that same night. The 4 teenagers were not isolated in any dramatic sense. They were on the edge of a recreational lake, within walking distance of homes, on a calm early summer night. What happened to them happened anyway. Sometime in the hours between roughly midnight and the first full light of a northern dawn, something came to the tent. The first people to see the campsite the next morning were not investigators. They were ordinary passers-by. Around 11 in the morning on June 5th, some boys who were out birdwatching noticed the tent from a distance. It had collapsed. One side of it had been pushed down over the people inside. At first, the boys assumed the campers were simply asleep. They did not go close. They moved on. It was later, when other people came near the site, that the truth of what they were looking at became clear. 3 of the 4 teenagers were dead: Mila Björklund, Anja Mäki, Seppo Boisman. They had been attacked with what investigators would conclude was a bladed weapon and a blunt weapon, some combination of stabbing and heavy blows. The violence had been extreme. It had happened, by every indication, fast. The 4th teenager, Niels Gustafsson, was found on top of the collapsed tent, rather than inside it. He was alive. He had serious injuries to his face and his head. He had a concussion. He had broken bones in his face. He was in deep shock. He survived. But the attack had left him unable to give investigators a clear, reliable account of what had happened in the night. And so the central problem of the Lake Bodom case was there from the very first morning. There had been a survivor, and the survivor could not tell anyone who had done it. The Lake Bodom killings became almost immediately one of the most intense criminal investigations in Finnish history. The site was searched. Witnesses from around the lake were interviewed. Anyone who had been near Bodom on the night of June 4th was in principle of interest. And the case generated suspects, more than one. Over the decades, several different men would be linked, in public or in the case file, to the killings at the lake. One early figure was a man who lived near the lake, and who, by some accounts, gave inconsistent statements and drew suspicion at the time. He died not long after the killings. Stories later circulated that he had, in some form, confessed or implicated himself. None of it was ever established as fact. Another man, years later, reportedly told people that he had been responsible, but claimed confessions in a case this famous are not rare, and they are not the same as proof. The physical evidence was the problem. It was 1960. Forensic science was a fraction of what it would later become. Crime scene preservation was not what modern investigators would expect. And the site itself, an outdoor clearing on a public lakeshore, was difficult from the start to control. There was no clear motive. Nothing of obvious value appeared to have been the point. The attack looked, to many investigators, less like a robbery and more like an explosion of violence with no rational target at all. And that is part of why the case burned itself so deeply into the Finnish memory. It was not only that 3 teenagers had been killed, it was that they had been killed in a popular, ordinary place, for no reason anyone could name, by someone who simply walked away into the trees. Years passed, then decades. The Lake Bodom case became Finland's most famous unsolved crime, and it stayed that way for a very long time. Until, in 2004, the investigation did something almost no one expected. In 2004, 44 years after the killings, Finnish authorities did something that stunned the country. They arrested the survivor. Nils Gustafsson, the 18-year-old, who had been found injured on top of the collapsed tent in 1960, was now a man in his 60s. And investigators now alleged that he had not been a victim of the attack at all. They alleged that he had been the one who carried it out. The theory put forward was in broad terms this: that the violence at the tent had not come from an outside intruder, that it had come from inside the group, that Gustafsson had attacked the other 3, including his own girlfriend, Mila Bjorklund, and that his own injuries were either part of the same event or were used to make him appear to be a victim. It was a dramatic reversal. For more than 4 decades, Nils Gustafsson had been known to the Finnish public as the boy who survived, the lone witness, the one the killer somehow had not finished. Now the state was arguing that there had never been an intruder to begin with. The case went to trial in 2005, and the court did not accept the prosecution's theory. Nils Gustafsson was acquitted. The court found that the evidence did not support the case against him. He was not only cleared, he was, in the aftermath, awarded compensation for what he had been put through. So the 2004 arrest, for all the shock it caused, did not end the case. It did the opposite. It tested a theory in open court, and the theory failed, which meant that, after the trial, Finland was left exactly where it had been for 45 years. 3 teenagers dead on a lakeshore, a survivor cleared by a court, and no one held responsible for any of it. If the survivor did not do it, then the original idea returns to the centre of the case. Someone came out of the woods. The intruder theory is in one sense the simplest reading of Lake Bodom. 4 teenagers were asleep in a tent. A stranger attacked them in the night and then left. And there were, over the years, candidates for that stranger. There was the local man who lived near the lake, who drew suspicion early and who died soon after. There were later figures who by various accounts claimed involvement or were named by others. But every version of the intruder theory runs into the same wall. No physical evidence has ever tied a specific outside person to that tent on that night in a way that holds. A claimed confession is not evidence. A reputation is not evidence. A man who behaved strangely near a lake is not by itself a murderer. And there is a harder problem still: the motive. If a stranger walked out of the trees and attacked 4 sleeping teenagers with sudden, extreme violence, why? Robbery does not fit cleanly. The attack does not read as something planned around a target. It reads instead as something close to random. And random violence is the hardest kind of case to ever close. Because the thing that usually leads investigators to a killer is the question of why a particular victim was chosen. At Lake Bodom, that thread may simply not exist. One of the reasons Lake Bodom has stayed unsolved is the scene itself. Consider what investigators were working with: an outdoor clearing on a public lakeshore, a summer night, a site that by morning had been seen by passers-by before it was secured. In a modern investigation, a crime scene is treated as a fragile, sealed thing. Access is controlled. Every contact is recorded. Trace evidence, fibres, hair, biological material, is collected with techniques that did not exist in 1960. In 1960, in a clearing by a Finnish lake, none of that was possible at the level a modern case would demand. And so the Lake Bodom case has a particular painful shape. It is a case where the answer, in theory, could once have been physically present at the scene, and where the means to capture it simply did not yet exist. Later, decades on, investigators did return to surviving material with newer methods. The 2004 case rested in part on re-examination of old evidence. But re-examination can only work with what was preserved, and what was preserved from a 1960 outdoor scene was limited. So the case sits in a kind of trap. Too old to have been captured properly the first time, and too thin now for the new tools to have enough to read. 3 teenagers were killed in a place hundreds of people knew, and the scene of it dissolved almost as soon as the sun came up. Nils Gustafsson lived the rest of his life in the long shadow of that lake. For 44 years, he was the survivor. Then, for a period, he was the accused. Then, after the 2005 trial, he was a man the courts had cleared, but whose name would forever return the same search result. He had been 18 years old on the night the tent came down. He had lost, in a few hours, 3 people his own age, including, by most accounts, the girl he was with. Whatever happened at Lake Bodom, Nils Gustafsson carried it for the rest of his life. And the 3 who died stayed exactly where the case left them. Mila Björklund, 15. Anja Mäki, 15. Seppo Boisman, 18. In Finland, The case never faded into the background, the way old cases sometimes do. Lake Bodom became a fixed point in the national memory, a name every Finn recognises, a story told and retold for more than 6 decades. It changed something too. The idea of the summer lake, of the long bright Nordic night, of teenagers free to camp where they liked, did not survive Bodom unmarked. A generation of Finnish parents learned the name of that lake and never forgot it. 3 teenagers pitched a tent on a popular shoreline on an ordinary Saturday night. They were within sight of an ordinary life, and the case of what happened to them has outlived almost everyone who was alive to investigate it. 66 years after the Lake Bodom murders, the case remains officially unsolved. It has been, over those decades, almost every kind of case at once. A stranger-intruder case, an inside-the-group case, a case with claimed confessions, a case with a dramatic late arrest, and a courtroom acquittal. And it has ended every time in the same place. No proof strong enough to fix the killing to a single name. The obstacles now are close to absolute. The scene is 66 years gone. The original investigators have largely died. The forensic material is old, limited, and has already been re-examined. What endures is the shape of it. 4 teenagers in one tent. 2 boys, 2 girls. A summer night by a lake that people knew and used. 3 of them dead by morning. 1 alive and unable to say what came out of the dark. We may never know whether the answer walked out of the pines or was inside that tent the whole time. But we know the tent came down. We know 3 young people did not get up. We know that 1 survived and could not, in the end, tell us why. And that, for as long as cold cases are remembered, is what keeps the file open, even when the lake is calm again. Chalkline file doesn't promise you answers. Sometimes the file is open for 66 years. Sometimes the survivor cannot tell you what they survived. 4 teenagers pitched the tent beside a Finnish lake on a summer night in 1960. 2 boys and 2 girls. The oldest was 18, the youngest was 15. What we have 66 years later is a collapsed tent on a popular shoreline, a survivor a court found innocent, a string of suspects who never resolved into proof, and a country that has never stopped arguing about it. If you know something the file does not, a name, a recollection, a story carried in a family from someone who was near Lake Bodom in June of 1960. Every detail still matters, even now, even 66 years on. Cold cases stay cold until they don't. This was the Bodom file.